Okay, welcome to this video. I'm going to keep it as short as possible. I'm really going to push to keep it really brief for you. So I don't know whether to call these Pincho podcasts or petite podcasts, but I want to come up with something along those lines. I'm going to try and deliver you some quality info about one specific topic really, really quickly, based on these two doctors talking about women at midlife, specifically about that as well, which is so hard to find. So we've got Dr. Stacey Sims first. She has a PhD in exercise physiology, nutrition scientist, performance and longevity. Okay, her book is called Raw. I will list it below. And then we've got Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who's osteopathic medicine, human nutrition, and did her clinical fellowship in geriatrics. She also has a book called Forever Strong, which I will also list. So just so you know who you're looking at here and what their qualifications are, because I think it's easy to watch a podcast and actually not know a single thing about the doctorate they've actually studied. So let's just always be informed about that as well. The podcast is sponsored, which means the information, there's nothing being sold here apart from the sponsored stuff. Although there are, as I mentioned, they both have books. Okay, so today we're talking about what's best in terms of training, weight training specifically for women at midlife and beyond. I'm going to start with Stacey Sims, and then I'm going to move on to Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and then I'm just going to pause it here and there to make comments based on things that I know from my own experience. Okay, here we go.
When we get to be 40 plus, we can actually go and do our power-based training. If you're in your 40s, you've never done resistance training at all, then we take between 2 weeks to 4 months to really learn how to move well, because there's a higher incidence of soft tissue injury and overall injury as we get into our 40s because of perturbations of estrogen. And ideally, when we get there, we're looking at that around minimum three resistance training with compound movements, and either one sprint interval or 2 sprint intervals and 1 HIIT in a week.
Okay, just breaking that down then. So what she's saying here is it takes 2 to 4 months to get into weight training. I don't agree. It takes 2 weeks for your nervous system to adjust. It doesn't take 4 weeks to learn how to move unless you've done movement a lot in your earlier life, dance or any kind of sport. You're going to be much faster at picking it up because you're going to have better body conditioning and my muscle connection than somebody who never has, like me, who didn't start weight training until I was in my 30s. It took me 2 years minimum to get my head around the movements and do them really well and get my muscle connection.
Just to remind people, compound movements, multi-joint movements, squats, deadlifts.
So she's saying do 3 weight training workouts a week based in compound movements.
Chin-ups, rows, overhead presses, bench presses, etc., as opposed to isolation movements where only one joint is moving. Yeah, and for everybody in all those age ranges that you describe, are you suggesting they train the same muscle groups 3 or 4 times per week, or they do some sort of split where it's upper body, lower body, take a day off, or upper body, take a day off, lower body, take a day off, what might work for them? Yeah, what works for them. If you're looking for short amount of time in the gym because of busy lives, then you can split it. If you're looking at, okay, well, I can allocate an hour to an hour and a half in the gym, then you can do total body with adequate rest.
Just going along. Just taking you to the next bit. Here we go.
Interesting.
Yeah. So when we're looking at working to failure, we're trying to get more of that lean mass growth with strength. When we get older, because it's so difficult to put on lean mass, we really want to focus on the strength component because that becomes more important when we're talking about longevity. Because if you're looking at
so really important what she's saying here is that she focuses more on strength training, which is compound lifts such as squats, overhead press, deadlift, bench, those kind of movements, because she wants to elicit strength in people that she's training, so that improves their longevity, as opposed to single joint movements, hypertrophy, where you're isolating muscles, which is how I coach. Well, I do both, but you all know that I use hypertrophy, where you're trying to get growth out of your muscles. Now, we'll talk about that later, but hypertrophy is where you're trying to get growth. Compound lifts are where you're trying to get strength. Now, what I prefer to do is combine both, because most of the people that come to me want to improve their physique. And in order to improve your physique using muscle, you need to do hypertrophy training. But in order to do, you will get strength from hypertrophy. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And actually, it's very good at stabilizing joints. But what she's saying is you need to do some strength work, because it's going to deeply improve your longevity.
Component from a central nervous system standpoint, we see it feeds forward into better proprioception.
Proprioception is how you move, how you understand your movement inside your own body and your mind.
Of cognitive decline, and this is the other thing that you in neuroscience would understand, the sex differences in things like dementia and Alzheimer's. There's some really interesting research looking at strength training and that power-based stuff when we're getting into our older ages, because we get more neural growth patterns and more neural pathways.
Even some interesting literature.
Yeah, so there you go. So she's talking about the neurological and nervous system connection with weight training as having enormous benefits. You can watch this in detail if you want to. I'm going to link it, so it's fine. Then we go into 45.
Yeah, in terms of longevity, that I don't think anyone else has ever said.
Now, the thing about it is men age more in a linear fashion, whereas women, we have a definitive point in our late 40s, early 50s, where all of a sudden things go to shit.
Yes, she said things go to shit. She did say it.
It's that perimenopausal state, and I can't tell you how many emails and DMs I get in a day from going on. I can't sleep, and then it is a huge change in the body, because you're having less and less of your sex hormones circulating. More and more anovulatory cycles means no progesterone or very low progesterone. You're having a difference in the pulse of your estradiol to those flatline aspects. And because every system in the body is affected by it, this is why you see more soft tissue injuries. Like, two of the biggest things that women who are in their 40s are going to PTs about are frozen shoulder and plantar fascia. Those are two really indicative issues that are happening in perimenopause. So that whole section of mid 40s to early 50s is a definitive aging point, where I really tried to get women to get into the heavy lifting and get into the patterns of polarizing their training, not putting an emphasis on zone 2, just really looking at how am I polarizing, how am I affecting my central nervous system, so that when they get into that one point in time of that perimenopause, their body is already conditioned for the stress that's coming.
Okay, really good point. May not have even thought about that. So polarizing your workouts means that you are going into different zones to get certain outcomes, rather than just always doing zone 2 like walking or yoga. So we need this kind of contrast to get our bodies to have certain reactions that we need for our health, as well as our strength and our physique. So what I am going to say here is that anyone thinking they need to suddenly go out and become a power lifter and start lifting really heavy weights, it doesn't work like that. You have to go through many phases before you're ready to lift heavy, because your nervous system has to adjust, your brain, your mind-muscle connection has to adjust. You have to understand the movement inside your body and understand how to switch muscles on and switch muscles off. You need to understand how to activate. You need to understand what's too much and what's not enough. Otherwise, you'll get injured. And you need enough stability in all of your joints to be able to do a compound lift. Nobody can do compound lifts if they don't have the stabilization in their joints, ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, elbows, all of it, in order to execute a movement like that. So she hasn't covered that, but I am. So now we're going to move across into the other podcast with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. Okay, here we go.
Then things become very complex, and someone is like, well, what do I do? But if you eat for the needs of skeletal muscle health, everything else falls into place.
My mom is 79 years old. She's relatively lean. By my read, I haven't seen her DEXA results, but she's probably had some muscular atrophy. She does yoga, she walks, she gardens, and seems to be in good health. Thank goodness.
Protein synthesis, there's really 4 inputs. There's resistance training, there's energy, there's insulin, growth hormones, and then there's leucine. When you are younger, your body is driven by more of the anabolic hormones, which is one reason why we believe that a younger individual can get away with 5 to 10 grams to 15 grams of dietary protein.
Because their levels of testosterone and or estrogen are driving protein synthesis in a way that lets them offset any dietary deficiencies?
That their body is just highly anabolic.
So what she's saying there is that when you're young, you're so anabolic, you have so much capacity to repair and grow that you can get away with feeding your body quite poorly and still see progress. Whereas that doesn't happen when you're older because you're not in that hormonal state anymore.
Mention something else.
As much.
An individual shouldn't just load protein. Loading extra protein and not moving is not a good idea because of protein's effect on mTOR throughout the body. So we talked about mTOR, which is mechanistic target of rapamycin in skeletal muscle, in the brain.
So she's saying if you're not moving at all, don't overload yourself on protein. And then we are going across into this section here. Here we go. Where we're getting into the training section. Okay.
That's exactly right. A multi-joint movement through full range of motion.
So, for instance, a squat or a deadlift.
That's right.
If somebody isn't skilled in squats or deadlifts, could they maybe hold on to a kettlebell of appropriate weight for them and do like a kettlebell squat?
I'm going to give them an even better solution. And this is this
So she's saying here she agrees compound lifts are necessary and everyone should be doing them. Lucky for you, I am teaching you compound moves in every single one of your workouts without fail. They are spliced into everything, so you don't even have to think about it. And then we're going over here.
Train for hypertrophy, which is muscle growth. And let's say that is 5 to 10 reps, 4 to 5 sets. You pick. There's many different ways that
where
it can
the final
be done.
Repetitions are challenging.
Where the final and the load is enough. And there's wonderful data out of McMaster University that it doesn't have to be heavyweight as long as the stimulus is enough.
Okay, so this is great news because this means what you're doing is right. Hooray! So what we've got here is she's saying do hypertrophy training, which is single joint movements that isolate the muscle groups, which is what we do in our weekly workouts. As long as it doesn't have to be a heavy weight, as long as the last 2 repetitions are challenging, which is what we try and shoot for.
And then we take it back to what is the stimulus? And the stimulus, the goal should be, are you moving the muscles that you are supposed to be doing? And are you generating enough activity to create adaptation and change? And so a high ground movement for someone who's listening to this and is thinking, I need skeletal muscle health. I walking is wonderful, but is walking enough to maintain those type 2 fibers? It's not. You will see
Walking is not enough, no. Walking is a great way to reduce stress, burn calories. Also, I would like to add here, and I might get some horrible messages, yoga and Pilates aren't necessarily, some of them are, like reformer might be, progressive. You need a progressive load going into your body for your muscles to be able to actually adapt and change. So if I know women tend to like gentle, but that's not solely what you need. Actually, you need some challenge through the muscles to help them at least maintain.
Transition, and we've all seen our aging parents. I mean, my dad is in his 70s. He's very fit, but he used to be a collegiate wrestler. He went to Wharton. He was captain of his wrestling team.
We could just list off some of the movements that people could think about in terms of these high ground movements. You mentioned hack squats, leg presses come to mind,
leg extension,
Sorry, here we go.
And part of the reason is the failure to focus on hypertrophy, and those are those type 2 fibers.
So type 2 fibers are fibers that create strength and power, like so sprinters and people who lift weights have more type 2 muscle fibers, and that's what she's referring to.
Type 2 fibers that transition with age to more type 1 fibers, those long, lean fibers. You go from bigger to bulky to less. Choosing activities to maintain those fibers. Also, these fibers are bigger. This is where glucose disposal goes.
So what she's saying is because the muscles are bigger, it means you are more insulin sensitive, which means that you're less likely to become type 2 diabetic.
Choosing things like leg extension, it's not a bad thing. If you get stronger and you have stronger muscles, then you will have more power. You'll be able to generate more force. You will be much less likely to fall.
And you'll be healthier overall because of muscle health.
Okay, so these are all great reasons to... Hypertrophy is also great for creating a physique. If you want shape, if you want a nice shaped silhouette, hypertrophy is the way to go.
We could just list off some of the movements that people could think about in terms of these high ground movements. You mentioned hack squats, leg presses come.
Supported back, any kind
rows,
supported row. Again,
these are mostly machine exercises that you're
The high ground movements she's talking about are movements where you have some kind of stability and support. So, I'm always saying stagger your feet when you're lifting. That's to try and give you the support you need to be able to isolate the muscle groups. That's why we often use chairs and stools and things like that, because we need stability to be able to isolate muscles, especially when you're a beginner.
They are, which is
cables
unusual.
And machines.
So cables would be considered low ground because you're kind of in space. And if you think about it, what takes someone out in their 40s? What takes someone out of the game? It's a tendon injury. Tendinopathies, whether it's a shoulder, whether it's a hamstring, whether it's a hip. And part of the reason is there's muscular strength. We focus on muscular strength, but there's also tendon strength, which takes time. And when you get tendinopathies, you get the thickening of these tissues. People will say that tendon lays down much slower, that the tendons turn over maybe 0.5 to 1.5% per day. It's not that substantially slower. It's highly active tissue. You need blood flow. You have to treat your body with respect, that if you think you can always train the way that you did when you were younger and just hit those heavy weights, if you get injured and you are not allowing your tendons to keep up, then overall injury over time, again, this is what we would call maybe not a catabolic crisis, but close.
Okay, great. So I hope you have enjoyed that. That's all I'm going to share for today because it's very specific to weight training. So what we've got in conclusion is Dr. Stacey Sims is saying use compound lifts to improve your longevity. Compound lifts are multi-joint lifts, deadlift, squat, overhead press, bench, row, all of those. We include all of those in the workouts on Team Yo. And then we've got Dr. Gabrielle Lyon saying use hypertrophy to increase the size of your muscles, to reduce your chance, to improve your glucose disposal, which means improve your insulin sensitivity. Also, I'm saying it helps create a better aesthetic because I know everybody is interested in that regardless. And then obviously to make sure that you do everything progressively, don't skip stages, because if you let your ego take charge when you're lifting, you will skip stages, then you could end up with a tendon injury and then you're out of the game. And that tendon is slow to repair. So we have to let the tendons catch up with the muscles, which is why everything has to be progressive. proprioception, understanding the movement in your mind, in your body, becoming more coordinated, all takes time. So what's really reassuring about this for me and for you is that according to the most up-to-date information and research, we are doing the right thing, both for our physique and for our longevity. So isn't that fantastic? You can just carry on doing the workouts in the knowledge that it's backed by these people. These women are leading in the current kind of menopause arena. So it's great. I think we're in a really wonderful place at the moment where stuff for women our age is actually being addressed. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you again soon.